transmigrated as a disabled protagonist. How should I continue the script? Chapter 7, The Black Clinic. Tonight, Mori Ogai's clinic has ceased operations. Tezuka Osamu, during those 3 days, didn't just stay with the sheep. He also took time to meet with Dr. Mori, establishing an initial cooperation. The premise of this cooperation was that Mori Ogai would provide protection for both of them and offer underground medical services for Yakimaru. In comparison to what Tezuka Osamu had agreed to do for Mori Ogai, these conditions were just an introduction to its master. The clinic's lights were fully on, windows tightly shut, and specialized ventilation systems were activated. The various medical supplies were cleared out to make space for a designated area for physical examinations, with the scent of disinfectant lingering all around. However, things didn't go as smoothly as Tezuka Osamu had hoped. Yakimaru was fiercely resistant. As Tezuka Osamu dragged him closer to this underground clinic, Yakimaru's senses immediately flashed a red warning. Within the range of his vision, a human life flame flickered about 10 meters ahead of them, blood red in hue. The bright crimson aura covered the life flame, so thick it seemed fueled by sins, proclaiming how many people it had killed. The worst of the worst, a murderer among murderers. This kind of human might have taken more lives than even demonic creatures, with a soul so tainted it ranked just below that of the demon god and the demons. Yakimaru couldn't endure it any longer. He immediately pushed Tezuka Osamu aside and launched an attack toward the door where Mori Ogai stood. He leaped forward with the speed of an arrow, breaking free from Tezuka Osamu's restraint with sheer force. Mori Ogai, as if having anticipated this, carefully retreated behind the door. Just as the ancient warrior-like blade came crashing down and the door was about to shatter, a young blonde girl in a white nurse's uniform rushed out, raising a large syringe in her hand to block the attack. A fierce clash instantly erupted between the two combatants with extraordinary abilities. Blades flashed and cut through the air, forcing Elise to try and shift the battlefield's location, but failed. Yakimaru's target was Mori Ogai, not the strange ability-made figure blocking his path. The instigator of this conflict, Mori Ogai, sighed helplessly and said to Tezuka Osamu, "You didn't tell me he was this dangerous." Tezuka Osamu chuckled, "You also didn't mention you're this evil." As Tezuka Osamu observed alongside the port mafia members in the Suribachi district, even some of the hardened criminals with dozens of lives on their hands hadn't triggered in Yakimaru the kind of relentless determination to kill like this. This indicated one thing: the partner he had chosen was indeed a black killer who wouldn't hesitate to take lives. He was far more than just a simple doctor. Dozens of lives? No, at least hundreds, and if one dared to guess, it might even exceed 1,000. Seeing that Elise was about to be torn apart, Tezuka Osamu began to suspect deep down that Mori Ogai had once been involved in war, either as a battlefield medic or perhaps a military officer. He exchanged a glance with Mori Ogai, and they acted in unison, perfectly coordinated. Testing him like this was enough. Yakimaru. Elise. Elise was the first to stop. Her syringe was sliced in two by Yakimaru, leaving her weaponless. Meanwhile, Tezuka Osamu swiftly joined the fray, positioning himself between Yakimaru and Elise. He stood fearlessly, calm and rational to a terrifying degree. Yakimaru's right arm blade narrowly veered away from him, barely grazing past his face. Tezuka blew a breath, sending a few strands of his hair fluttering. He felt a slight regret. If Yakimaru had gone just a little further, he could have been decapitated in an instant without any pain. "Alright, stop." Tezuka Osamu's actions proved that Yakimaru listened to him. Yakimaru did not attack, but his gaze remained fixed in Mori Ogai's direction, locked onto that sinful life flame. Mori Ogai's professional curiosity took over. Seeing that there was no immediate danger, he began to analyze. How does he see me? Is it the mask, crafted from special material? Or is it his unique abilities that directly alert him, urging him to act? To be honest, Mori Ogai didn't believe Yakimaru possessed such a strong sense of justice. A black-haired boy without arms or legs, wearing a mask every day, was someone without an identity, someone who either lived in the underground world or had someone protecting him as he grew up. How could such a person have been taught such a black and white view of good and evil? It's not that the perspective of good and evil is bad, but it's unnecessary for someone like him. To exist was already incredibly difficult, and he still had to learn how to fight. The fact that he didn't harbor envy toward normal people with complete limbs was already admirable. Neither, Tezuka Osamu understood the way Dr. Mori's mind worked. He picked up the discarded arm, brushed off the dust, and carefully reattached it to the weapon embedded in Yakimaru's hands. Yakimaru was filled with all kinds of confusion. He didn't need a sixth sense to tell him how dangerous the people around him were. "Dororo, you must never get close to people like this." Tezuka Osamu grabbed Yakimaru, trying to pull him forward, but no matter how hard he tugged, the stubborn boy remained rooted to the spot like a nailed-down post. Mori Ogai, watching with amusement, said, "He doesn't want to enter the clinic, so there's no way I can give him a full-body checkup. Looks like your puppet isn't as obedient as you claimed." Elise, who was standing beside him, chimed in sarcastically, "He looks kinda dumb." Upon hearing this, Tezuka Osamu was displeased. "Yakimaru is very obedient. It's all because of you, this heartless dark man, that he's been forced into combat mode. And as for you, a figure created by an ability, what right do you have to mock Yakimaru? He almost tore you apart." Having anticipated some conflict beforehand, Tezuka Osamu took a deep breath, though he hadn't expected the conflict to be this intense. Earlier in the summer, the boy yet 14, once again restrained Yakimaru, dragging him into the clinic. His smooth execution of this task made Mori Ogai see him in a different light, thinking, "Tezuka-kun, you're still young, but your binding technique isn't bad at all." Meanwhile, Yakimaru's inner thoughts were, with his joints bound, he could only struggle desperately, feeling like a fish on a chopping board, completely devoid of any sense of safety. "Dororo. Dororo, you can't keep treating me like this. I want to kill this evil man." In the clinic, with Tezuka Osamu's tacit approval, Mori Ogai administered an injection of muscle relaxant directly into Yakimaru's neck, gently pressing the syringe to inject the liquid. Yakimaru's strength didn't weaken much, and he still had tremendous power. Mori Ogai remarked, "His physical condition is exceptional, and his resistance to drugs isn't bad either. He's a promising candidate in terms of martial ability." After thoroughly enjoying Yakimaru's desperate struggling, Mori Ogai administered another injection, knocking Yakimaru out. Tezuka Osamu's curiosity was instantly piqued. "What kind of injection is this?" Mori Ogai raised the now empty syringe in his hand, smiling kindly. "A personally formulated solution. It won't harm the body, it'll just put him to sleep for a while. It's a unique formula, unavailable on the market." At that moment, Tezuka Osamu felt a surge of motivation to learn about pharmacology. "Now, I'll begin the examination," Mori Ogai said, asking, "You don't mind, do you, Tezuka-kun?" Tezuka Osamu's expression was calm, showing indifference. Mori Ogai raised an eyebrow, no longer paying attention to the family member of the patient. He was entirely focused on examining the living specimen under his care. At this moment, Elise, understanding the situation perfectly, quietly moved to the side, sitting on a cardboard box near the door, as light as if she had no weight. She even took out crayons and a sketchbook. On the operating table, Yakimaru lay unconscious, completely unaware of the advanced modern technology he was about to face. Mori Ogai first put on gloves, used a scalpel to delicately cut open the bandages on Yakimaru's body with such precision that he didn't even nick the skin. After that, he saw a deep red mark beneath the bandages and furrowed his brows slightly. Was his skin peeled off? He then carefully felt Yakimaru's shoulder and arm bones, pausing briefly when he extended the arm, before revealing the prosthetics at the elbow joint. A pair of prosthetic forearms was removed by him and placed on the tray beside him. The black-haired youth had lost both arms and was immediately stripped of his legs as well. His clothes were removed, with Mori Ogai leaving him only in his underwear. Lying on the stretcher, the boy appeared almost like a dissected body, this unsettling sight causing Dazai Osamu's eyes to flicker slightly, as though feeling uncomfortable for some reason, even though he had seen plenty of dead people before. Mori Ogai explained the reason: it's not about rationality. Humans are always easily moved by the suffering of others, like the saying goes, when the rabbit dies, the fox grieves. His condition, even worse than death, inevitably stirs a discomfort in your mind. Dazai Osamu lowered his head and said, "I see." Yet he smiled faintly. "Continue, Dr. Mori. I need to know just how many defects Yakimaru has, what caused them, and whether there's a way to treat him. You did promise me you'd give me a satisfying answer." Why was he smiling? Mori Ogai was slightly surprised. With his keen eye, he could tell that Dazai Osamu had a strange attachment to this puppet. Following that, Mori Ogai's gaze rested on Yakimaru's mask. This face was too exquisitely crafted and expressionless, with no sign of discomfort. It was clearly the work of a top-tier sculptor, meticulously crafted to perfection for the wearer. "Dazai-kun, may I take it off?" After all, the examination tools can't be used with the mask on. Though his words were framed as a question, Mori Ogai's hands moved without hesitation. He noticed that as he removed the mask, Dazai Osamu suddenly turned his back to him, as if he had no intention of looking at the face beneath. Mori Ogai paused for a moment, sensing something was off as he continued to observe. Beneath the mask, a grotesque face, stripped of its skin, was exposed to the air. The eye sockets and nose were dark, hollow holes, and the mouth revealed only sharp white teeth, showing that Yakimaru had lost all his normal human senses from the very beginning. Is this Japan's latest horror film? The visual impact was overwhelming, even for someone like Mori Ogai, who was accustomed to witnessing the state of human death. He was utterly stunned, never expecting the face beneath the mask to be so horrifying. His gaze scattered, his lips slightly parted, and even his eyes refused to look directly at Yakimaru's real appearance. "Dazai-kun, why didn't you mention this to me earlier?" At the door, Elise heard Rin Taro's sharp gasp and quickly turned her head. "Rin Taro?" Immediately, the clinic erupted with the terrified scream of a young girl seeing a ghost. "What is this awe?" Dazai Osamu turned towards Elise, walking over calmly. He reached out and gently patted the terrified Elise on the top of her head, using the very head-patting move he had learned from Yakimaru to immediately erase her presence. The blonde young girl looked at Dazai Osamu in shock, unable to resist before vanishing. Mori Ogai tensed up completely. "Dazai-kun?" After dispelling Mori Ogai's human-like ability projection, Dazai Osamu joyfully replied, "Dr. Mori, please focus a bit more. I just thought Miss Elise was too noisy, so I made her leave for a bit." He appeared to be making a joke, but in his heart, it was filled with nothing but a cold exchange of information and a calculated assessment of value. This is my ability, no longer human. Having lost the qualifications of being human, unable to feel the emotions of ordinary people, he didn't want to look at Yakimaru, fearing that his own desire for death would be shaken. Existence is so dull. Why would someone, stripped of everything, living a fate worse than death, still want to survive? Mori Ogai's thoughts grew heavy, partly because of Yakimaru, but also because of Dazai Osamu. His cold, metallic gaze rested on Yakimaru's body. "I've found 2 diamonds. Unfortunately, one of those diamonds has been shattered to this state, a condition beyond repair." He removed Yakimaru's unusually ear, touched the scalp, confirming it wasn't a wig. Suddenly, as if he had discovered something, he followed the scalp down to the neck, his hand feeling along the back for further examination. "The spine is not right," Mori Ogai said loudly. "Dazai-kun, his spine is also artificial." Dazai Osamu instinctively wanted to look but forced himself to resist, narrowly avoiding falling into Dr. Mori's trap. Mori Ogai had no intention of tricking him into turning around. At this moment, he was genuinely astonished by the unimaginable nature of life itself. If Yakimaru's internal organs were intact, this young man had lost his eyes, ears, nose, tongue, skin, spine, and limbs. It could be said that he had endured more tortures than any punishment recorded in human history. It's worth noting that even the notoriously cruel methods of the port mafia, when dealing with traitors, at most involve smashing a person's teeth on the stairs, cutting off an arm, and then rewarding them with a few bullets. The ones who tortured him, just how much did they hate him? Tezuka Osamu did not respond, faintly sensing that the reality was likely far more horrifying than even his own grim suspicions. Mori Ogai adjusted his mindset back to that of a doctor and, after completing the initial procedures, lifted Yakimaru and placed him into the examination device. High-tech medical equipment is always far more precise than the human eye or experience. After several hours of examination passed, while Tezuka Osamu dozed off in a chair, Mori Ogai set down the sealed report and said, "Tezuka-kun, we might be facing a medical dilemma unprecedented in history." Tezuka Osamu, who had spent 3 days exhausting all his efforts to sabotage the sheep, now found his face showing signs of weariness, as even staying up all night had begun to take its toll. What dilemma? He's like this from birth. Is there really someone in this world who has struggled with fate since the moment they were born? Mori Ogai felt bewildered. His hand slipped slightly, and the boy on the examination table lowered his head. His unhealthy-looking cheek muscles twitched, and his teeth gently clenched together. It wasn't shock, but rather an indescribable pressure that emanated from him. "Hey, Dr. Mori. You say he's been fighting so hard to survive. What's the point of it?" "There is no point." Mori Ogai gave an answer unlike what most people would, one that resonated with Tezuka Osamu's mindset yet did not contradict common sense. The middle-aged man, dressed in a white lab coat, set down his notes and pen, feeling somewhat fatigued as he rubbed the edge of his hairline. In the stillness of the late night, he spoke to his youth companions. "This is humanity. No matter if they live in hell, there will always be those who refuse to accept their fate. Tezuka-kun, do you still want to save him? To save someone completely unlike you, who resists death and utterly rejects the will to die that you desire?" Under Mori Ogai's simple question, Tezuka Osamu's nerves tensed. He muttered, "I want him to die." Mori Ogai, smiling, guided him to voice his inner thoughts. "Yes, death can bring relief. The puppet you call Yakimaru no longer needs to struggle on the brink of death." Tezuka Osamu, entranced by Mori Ogai's words, kept thinking about the benefits of death, and murderous intent began to rise. But before he could stand up, he suddenly let out a cry, covering his face, his fingers tightly blocking his eyes. "Dr. Mori, why haven't you put the mask back on him yet?" Mori Ogai innocently replied, "I just finished the examination, and his face also needs ventilation." The black chair swiveled slightly, full of mischievous intent. "Tezuka-kun, face reality." "I refuse. I use 3D facial recognition technology to assess it for you, and the person who made his mask is undeniably a top master. His facial structure is quite good, his real face isn't that different from the mask." "What are you trying to say?" "What I'm saying is, just accept it for now. Yakimaru is still a rather handsome young man. That kind of, just accept, only works if you turn off the lights." Tezuka Osamu glared angrily at Mori Ogai through the gaps between his fingers, and if looks could kill, Mori Ogai would have been slashed into pieces 1,000 times over. Mori Ogai, however, was quite tolerant toward this young man who shared a similar intellect and temperament to his own, which in turn caused him to develop a bit of fondness for Yakimaru as well. Those who fight to survive always possess a certain explosive force of life that can leave a deep impact on others. And then they captivate those lost souls like Tezuka-kun. After waking from a deep sleep, having spent the night in unconsciousness, Yakimaru suddenly felt that his clothes had been changed. Sitting up alertly, the first thing he saw was the calm, white flame before him. The flame seemed a bit lifeless. Yakimaru reached out again to touch Dororo's head. Had something happened? Tezuka Osamu, his eyes wide from a sleepless night, muttered in a daze. Yakimaru, from now on, will follow him and eat instant noodles. We can't afford the medical bills for now. Beside them, Mori Ogai was eating instant noodles without a care for his image. What's wrong with instant noodles? They're cheap. Yakimaru, having lost contact with the outside world and relying only on his instincts to make judgments, thought for a moment, then extended his arm, drawing his blade and pointing it in Mori Ogai's direction, expressing a question to Dororo. Kill that person. Dazai Osamu, with lifeless eyes, pushed the arm back in, seriously observing Yakimaru's delicate, beautiful mask. Does Yakimaru's face really match the mask? With this thought, Dazai Osamu unknowingly sank into the strange idea that Mori Ogai had planted in his mind. Yakimaru, even if you have to sell yourself in the future, make sure to earn that money back for me. Yakimaru felt as though this pure white flame had suddenly become tainted for a second. Maybe I was mistaken. Chapter 7 End.